At 10, extraordinary scenes tonight as Parliament descends into chaos. MPs walked out in protest over a vote on whether to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, and the Speaker had to apologise.
I regret how it's ended up. It was not my intention.
And the Speaker now has to regain the trust of the House of Commons, and he's promised to speak to party leaders about what happens next.
In Gaza, after Israeli special forces rescued 2 hostages in Gaza last week, Fergal Keane investigates what happened in the aftermath.
I've had so many wonderful messages and cards, and
I can imagine.
It's reduced me to tears most of the time.
Well, I can imagine.
King Charles thanks the country for the support since his cancer diagnosis. What now for Old Trafford? The new co-owner of Manchester United suggests there could be a new stadium for the club. And could this revolving restaurant make a comeback? One of London's most famous landmarks, BT Tower, is being turned into a hotel.
On BBC London, an exclusive investigation into dangerous balconies on an East London estate. We speak to the residents scared to go outside for fear of further collapse.
Good evening. There have been extraordinary scenes in Parliament tonight. The day began with MPs preparing to vote on calling a ceasefire in Gaza. But instead of ending the day with a clear decision on what to say about the Israel-Gaza conflict, the House of Commons descended into chaos as MPs argued about arcane voting procedures and how a vote could be held. Our deputy political editor, Vicky Young, has been following it all and joins us now. Vicky.
Yes, Sophie, those events in the Middle East really have led to some very emotional and fraught and often angry debates in the House of Commons over that, particularly over the idea of when and if there should be an immediate ceasefire. Now, today was shaping up to be pretty tricky for the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, because it was the SNP's day. They chose the topic and they were going to force a vote on whether there should be an immediate ceasefire. That, of course, was going to expose some divisions in the Labour Party, but none of it turned out as anyone was expecting.
There was confusion. There were angry demands for the Speaker to explain himself.
Where on earth is the Speaker of the House of Commons? How do we bring him to that seat?
And there was a walkout by the SNP and Conservatives, an unlikely alliance. Chaotic scenes in the Commons after MPs had been debating one of the most serious foreign policy issues of the day. Outside Parliament, feelings were already running high,
Ceasefire now!
with hundreds of people queuing for hours to lobby their MPs. Today, the rules meant the only motion that was being considered was one from the SNP, calling for an immediate ceasefire. Lots of Labour MPs were tempted to vote for it, against their leader's wishes. But that all changed when the Speaker, going against official advice, said this.
I think it's important on this occasion that the House is able to consider the widest possible range of options. I have therefore decided to select the amendments both in the name of the Prime Minister and in the name of the Leader of the Opposition.
Furious SNP MPs felt that was bending the rules to help Sir Keir Starmer out of a sticky situation.
And now we're completely appear to be doing things in a way that's never been done before. Can I ask for your advice, Mr Speaker, and what is the point of an opposition day if it's going to be done like this?
Later, just before the votes were due to happen, the Leader of the Commons weighed in.
The Government will play no further part in the decision this House takes on today's proceedings. I would like to stress that the Government's position on Israel and Gaza remains unchanged.
By the time the votes on the ceasefire were being called, there was so much noise, very few could hear what was going on. To the side, watching all this unfold, was Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who'd had no choice but to come back to apologise for the mess.
I am honest to this House, I am true to this House, I believe in all members of this House, and I have tried to do what I thought was the right thing for all sides of this House. It is regrettable, and I apologise.
All this meant Labour avoided another damaging rebellion over Gaza, and they were happy to defend Sir Lindsay's decision.
The Speaker was rightly playing his role. He's there to protect the rights of all MPs. He was wanting to ensure the widest possible debate.
The serious issue of what's going on in the Middle East was debated today. It was never going to change UK foreign policy, but several MPs have said this was an embarrassing episode for Parliament.
Now, look, when it comes to the House of Commons, the Speaker really is the referee. He needs to have the respect and authority of MPs, and that certainly has been dented today. But others I've spoken to say that he does have a reputation of being even-handed and fair-minded. And even though there are many who think he's made a big mistake today, some even want a rerun of those votes, there are many others who will back him because they think that he was genuinely trying to do the right thing, even though it didn't turn out as he'd wanted it to.
Vicky Young, thank you. Well, in Gaza, Israeli special forces last week rescued 2 of the hostages kidnapped on October the 7th by Hamas. They were being held in southern Gaza in the city of Rafah. There was huge relief for the families of 60-year-old Fernando Simon Marman and 70-year-old Louis Ha. But the military raid to free them reportedly left more than 70 people dead and dozens wounded. The BBC special correspondent Fergal Keane has been hearing the stories of civilians and medics caught up in a night of fear. His piece contains distressing details.
They were rescued from here.
The 2 Israeli hostages that were kidnapped by Hamas on the massacre of October 7th are now home.
This is the story of the price paid by the civilians of Rafah on the night of February the 12th. The rescue began around 1:45 a.m. By the time the hostages were safe, more than 70 people were reported killed, a high number civilians. In this house, a doctor from Médecins Sans Frontières lay across her children to protect them. She's asked to remain anonymous. Voice messages to colleagues afterwards convey her horror.
On our home, I found pieces of human flesh. We found a whole lower limb belonged to a human that we don't know who he is. When I saw the pieces of the flesh on the floor, I cried.
Some of the wounded were brought to an international field clinic.
Bilateral amputation.
Dr. Javed Ali from Pakistan has worked here for the last 2 months.
It was very close to the hospital. The windows and the doors were rattling. It was extremely scary. All in all, we saw more than 20 patients. A lot of women and children were trying to come and seek refuge in the hospital.
It is in the stories of individual families that the impact of the raid is most painfully expressed. Nawara al-Najjar is a mum of 6 and pregnant with a 7th child. She woke after being injured by an explosion.
وصحصحت عن حالي لقيت جوزي قاعد بينازع. ولادي أول ما شافوه صار يصرخوا يا بابا يا بابا تتركناش تتركناش. الذنب اللي زي هذا. الذنب الأطفال. الذنب أنا. ترملت وأنا صغيرة عمري 27 سنة.
Nawara remembers happy days with Abed al-Rahman, 32 years old when he was killed.
قلبه طيب كتير كتير كتير. كان هو له فترة كان كتير يعني علاقته مع الأطفال كويسة ومعايا كويس. يقعد يحضن فيه حتى كان يمشط لهم من شعورهم للبنات قلت تعال يا بابا يمشط لهم حنون كتير كتير.
Here, some of the couple's children in hospital on the night their dad died. 12-year-old Samaya, treated for minor physical wounds but traumatized. And 13-year-old Malak, who lost her eye in the raid.
ما كانوش معالجين قعدت فيها يمكن 3 أيام بعد ال3 أيام عملت لي العملية صابت بعيني بصفحتي دخل فيا رصاص ما دخل وما خرج شو ذنبي إنه يصير فيا هيك وجع 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 خسرت أبويا أنا خلاص
Israel accuses Hamas of using civilians as human shields. In a statement to the BBC, the IDF said it was committed to mitigating civilian harm. Military lawyers advised so strikes complied with international law. Commanders analyse, take into account expected military advantage and the likely collateral harm to civilians. The war goes on. Civilians like Abed al-Rahman keep being killed. In the voice message of the MSF doctor, a sense of the despair felt here.
This message means nothing to a lot of people and will change nothing. And to be honest, the one who died is the one who's lucky. The one who lived to suffer again and again and again, who the one have been cursed and abandoned by all people.
But the memory of their father will endure for all of their lives. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Jerusalem.
King Charles says he has been reduced to tears by the messages of support since he was diagnosed with cancer. He was speaking to the Prime Minister in his first face-to-face audience since his diagnosis was made public. Our royal correspondent Daniela Relf reports.
The Prime Minister, Your Majesty.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
They usually meet every week, but it's been a disrupted start to the year.
It's wonderful to see you looking so well.
No, it's all done by mirrors.
Well, we're all behind you. The country is behind you.
No, because I've had so many wonderful messages and cards, and
I can imagine.
It's reduced me to tears most of the time.
Clearly moved by the public's good wishes, this was a hint of normal royal business for the King.
The audience with the Prime Minister has been an important moment, a sign that the King is coping well with his cancer treatment and can still do those core duties.
It's now 3 weeks since the King left hospital after treatment for a prostate condition. It was during his stay here that his cancer was discovered. He's not expected to return to a full schedule of engagements for several months.
The charity extent.
The audience lasted around 45 minutes, during which the King also recognised how going public with his diagnosis had highlighted the work of cancer charities, many of which have him as a patron. Daniela Ralph, BBC News, Buckingham Palace.
The Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, has tonight insisted that the UK's nuclear deterrent is effective after it emerged that a test firing of an unarmed Trident missile failed for the second time in a row. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale has the story.
It's Britain's weapon of last resort. The nuclear missiles carried on these Royal Navy submarines, meant to deter any aggressor. Trident is the US-made ballistic missile on board, and this is what is supposed to happen. But in the most recent test, it didn't get this far. It just plopped into the ocean, and it's now the UK's second test fire fail. This test actually took place in January, but only now have details been released. The missile was launched from Britain's HMS Vanguard off the coast of Florida. It was supposed to fly about 3,700 miles and land harmlessly in the sea off West Africa. Instead, the unarmed test missile hit the water close to the launch site. So what do we know about the missile itself? Its US manufacturer says it has a range of more than 4,500 miles and can carry multiple nuclear warheads, each of which can be directed towards different targets. There have been 191 successful test launches, most carried out by the US, just a dozen by the UK. And the last 2 of those UK tests have gone wrong.
Of course, when the launch is announced in advance and the Defence Secretary is on board,
it doesn't look good. And of course, it's not good, I think, for the morale of the crew, which now goes on patrol, and morale across the submarine service, to have this kind of scrutiny.
Malfunctions like this one in the 80s, the early days of Trident, are relatively rare. But in 2016, another UK test missile also veered off course.
Set condition.
The MOD still insists the system's safe, secure and effective. The Defence Secretary, who was on board the submarine watching these kind of drills before the missile prematurely plummeted, called it an anomaly. He insisted the weapon worked, as did the Foreign Secretary tonight.
I've got nothing to add to the statement that's been made, but I'm absolutely clear that our independent nuclear deterrent is effective.
This won't change policy. Labour, too, is committed to Trident. But for the public, it might raise doubts. And Britain's adversaries will also take note. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
The public are being put at risk because the government's flagship Prevent programme is failing to identify extremists. That is the verdict of the man who the government asked to review its strategy. Sir William Shawcross, the writer and historian, says ministers have ignored some of his key recommendations. Our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, is with me now. Sir William's not happy.
Not at all. Prevent is a crucial part of the government's counter-terrorism strategy. It places public bodies, schools, the police under a legal duty to identify people who may turn to extremism. In 2021, the government asked Sir William Shawcross to review how it works. And a year ago, he concluded essentially that the programme had lost its way. Let's hear what he has to say about how the government has responded since.
The government has published a report saying that they have made some of those changes that I asked for, that I proposed, but not enough. The government has ignored some of my key recommendations, and I think as a result, the public is at risk.
Could you just describe a little bit what the recommendations you made that you think the government is ignoring would do?
I said that they should pay much more attention to the Hamas support network. There are, unfortunately, quite a lot of Hamas sympathisers and some operatives in this country, and Prevent and the police should have been working much harder against those Hamas people in this country.
What specifically could Prevent have been doing, and what could the government have been making sure Prevent does to address what you described?
Well, what I said was Prevent should return to first principles, which is stopping people supporting terrorism and stopping people becoming terrorists. That's what Prevent's duty is, and the government should be emphasising that, and they're not emphasising that enough.
Now, the government insists it is implementing Sir William's review. Indeed, it says of his 34 recommendations, it's already delivered 30 and will act soon on the rest. It's also worth noting Sir William was a controversial choice in some quarters to conduct this review. There are civil rights organisations and others who have always said that he was too focused on Islamist extremism. But crucially, the government has always backed his approach. That's why it's damaging for them that he's criticising them now.
Henry Zeffman, thank you. A senior civil servant has denied telling the man who was chair of the Post Office to stall compensation to victims of the Horizon IT scandal. Sarah Munby has written to the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, saying that at no point did she suggest delaying payments to sub-postmasters. Mr Staunton, who was sacked last month, has published the notes he took during a meeting with Ms Munby in January last year. Our business editor, Simon Jack, is here with more.
Thank you, Sophie. Yes, new chapters in this very unusual and bitter feud between the Business Secretary and this man, a industry veteran, Henry Staunton, been on boardrooms including Legal and General, New Look, was chair of WH Smith's, until last month was chair of the Post Office. He's found himself in a bitter row with Kemi Badenoch. In an interview with the Sunday Times, he said he was effectively told by the Business Department's top civil servant to stall compensation payments to the victims of the Post Office scandal. That claim was fiercely rejected by Kemi Badenoch in the Commons on Monday, who called the claims a disgrace and accused him of spreading falsehoods.
Mr Staunton claimed that when he was first appointed as chair of the Post Office, he was told by a senior civil servant to stall on paying compensation. There is no evidence whatsoever that this is true.
Well, today, Henry Staunton provided some. He produced a memo he wrote and sent to himself and the Post Office Chief Executive, Nick Reed, right after that conversation in January last year. That note quotes the civil servant as saying this was not the time to tackle long-term issues and the plan should be to hobble to the next election. Mr Staunton said he took long-term issues to include the Horizon scandal, which is one of, if not the most pressing and long-running issues facing the Post Office. In another stinging rebuke this morning, the government said that was not the case. A statement read, the long-standing issues around Post Office finances are a matter of public record and do not include postmaster compensation, which is being fully funded by the government. Henry Staunton is either confused or deliberately mixing up two issues. Well, earlier this evening, the civil servant at the centre of this row, Sarah Munby, released a letter saying, it is not true that I made any instruction, either explicitly or implicitly, to Mr Staunton to in any way delay compensation payments. I did not. Since then, Mr Staunton has released another statement sticking to his guns, saying his notes were made at the time, Munby's a year later. Now, the matter was raised at Prime Minister's questions today. The Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, also mentioned a BBC report on how a 2016 investigation into whether individual Post Office branch accounts could be altered remotely was stopped before it was completed, a fact that ministers in government at the time were aware of.
Had that investigation revealed that they could be altered, which we now know to be the case, the livelihoods of those wrongly prosecuted could have been saved. What did government ministers know about it at the time?
Well, in response, the Prime Minister said the investigation into what happened was ongoing.
It was actually following a landmark 2019 High Court case that the previous government established a statutory inquiry led by Sir Win Williams, which is uncovering exactly what went wrong.
Now, as that inquiry continues, though, hundreds of sub-postmasters continue to wait for compensation. £1 billion has been earmarked, but less than £150 million has so far been paid out. Sophie.
Simon, thank you. The British billionaire Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who's become a co-owner of Manchester United, says he wants to build a new national stadium for the club that can also serve the north of England. Sir Jim says reviving the club is an enormous challenge, but thinks that after 2 or 3 seasons, they could knock their rivals off their perch. He's been speaking to the BBC sports editor, Dan Roan.
Already one of the country's wealthiest businessmen, petrochemicals billionaire Sir Jim Ratcliffe is now intent on leading a revival at Manchester United. And today, speaking for the first time since officially becoming co-owner of the club he's supported since childhood, the Ineos founder told me just how much it meant to him.
It's a very proud moment, and I'm sort of very honoured to be in this position where I can influence the future of Manchester United. It's not something, of course, I would ever have contemplated in my younger years, but here we are. You do have to pinch yourself, really, because it is a sort of a boyhood dream, but they never come true normally, do they? This is the exception to the rule, and it's a nice one for me.
But while United have enjoyed a recent improvement in form, 11 years have now passed since they last won the Premier League.
How determined are you to restore this club to its former glories?
The only reason I've got involved in Manchester United is because I want to see Manchester United restored to where it should be. It's not switching a light switch, it's not just about a new coach. It's a 2 to 3 season challenge to get, that organisation and environment right.
But less than 24 hours after Ratcliffe's purchase of a 28% stake in the club was confirmed, he told me he wants to make an immediate impact when it comes to the club's stadium, Old Trafford.
What's your latest thinking about Old Trafford and its future and the state that it's in?
A bit tired, frankly. It's in need of refurbishment. It's about time somebody built a national stadium, or a stadium which is capable of taking national games, in the north of England rather than building everything in the south.
It sounds like your preference, Sir Jim, is for a new stadium, if it can be achieved.
If it can be achieved, then yeah, that would clearly be my preference. I think I'd be very excited about that prospect.
Ratcliffe had wanted to buy the club outright, but he's had to settle for a minority share that sees him take control of football operations from the American Glazer family, who put the club up for sale after years of protests from fans over the club's debt and decline.
So do you understand that anger of many fans?
No, I understand the frustrations and the anger, but where I sit today is looking forward, not looking backwards. So, what I'd like to say to the fans is, give us a little bit of time, try to be patient, and we'll try to build Manchester United back to where it should be.
But there will be worries from fans that the Glazers remain in ultimate overall control.
You know, I can't give people assurances or guarantees about the future, but my personal view is that there's a good level of trust and it will work.
So what of Mason Greenwood's future at the club? The striker on loan in Spain after charges against the player, including attempted rape and assault, were dropped last year. He denied all the alleged offences.
We need to look at the facts, not the hype. We need to look at the facts. We need to judge fairly, and we need to take into consideration what the values of the club are. And then we come out of that with a decision.
20 years ago, legendary former manager Sir Alex Ferguson famously vowed to end Liverpool's dominance, and now Ratcliffe wants to do the same to both them and champions Manchester City.
I'm in exactly the same page as Alex Ferguson. I'd want to knock them all off their perch.
How far behind are you to them?
A long way behind them at the moment, yeah.
Sir Jim Ratcliffe speaking to our sports editor, Dan Roan. Now, Germany has the largest economy in Europe, but now its government has officially slashed its forecast for economic growth in 2024, warning that Germany is in troubled waters. Last year, its economy shrank by 0.3%. Business leaders are urgently calling for less bureaucracy, as our Berlin correspondent Jess Parker reports.
Car making, chemicals, heavy industry, how we perceive the German powerhouse economy. But Europe's engine of growth is stuttering.
Germany will be the sick man of Europe, like 20 years ago.
Andre runs a building firm and has a common complaint that German red tape and environmental rules are punishing his industry.
The higher regulation we have in Germany are slowing down the economy because we are taking too long to finish the apartments we need really here, especially in the capital in Berlin.
Building things, making things, it's something Germany's supposed to be good at. But demand has slumped, not just in construction, and it's dragging the economy down. Charts in hand, Germany's economy minister also pointed to acute labour shortages as he talked of troubled waters but better times to come. In Germany, global shocks have combined with longer-term problems.
We fell, especially under the government of Angela Merkel, I have to say, we fell a bit asleep and we were very comfortable in general. So I think we have to catch up.
I think we had bigger dreams and we thought we were going to be able to live bigger lives and more financial free. But now the reality hits us and it's not as good as we thought it was going to be.
Forecasts vary, but look at this. Germany's lagging behind among G7 major economies. The European countries, including the UK, also look set for lacklustre growth.
The sluggish growth in Germany is certainly also going to affect our neighbours and our trading partners worldwide. The German economy is running the risk of not being the growth engine of Europe anymore, but rather slowing growth down.
Back on the building site, 16 new apartments will eventually stand here. A substantial task, but lifting up the German economy will be a mammoth one. Jessica Parker, BBC News in Berlin.
It is one of London's most famous landmarks. Now the BT Tower is set to be turned into a hotel after it was sold for £275 million. Once Britain's tallest building, the 600-foot tower was built in 1961 and originally called the Post Office Tower. First used to carry telecommunications signals around the country, it was opened in 1965 by the then Prime Minister Harold Wilson.
On average, 4,500 people a day take the...
It even had a famous revolving restaurant, which took 22 minutes to fully rotate and served hundreds of meals every day. But the restaurant finally closed in 1980. For almost 20 years, it was London's tallest building. Now the tower is being turned into a hotel with great views. And who knows, the revolving restaurant may be about to make a comeback. The actor Ewan McIntosh, best known for playing Keith in the BBC's The Office, has died at the age of 50. He also appeared in Miranda and Little Britain. Our arts correspondent David Sillitoe looks back at his life.
Right, you've left this section completely blank, Keith. You haven't done the Q&A.
Ewan McIntosh as Keith in The Office and Appraisal Day.
To what extent do you...
A scene made special by Ewan McIntosh's spectacular display of...
You just tick one of the boxes. Not at all. To some extent, very much so, don't know. What would you tick?
Don't know. Glorious indifference.
Studying?
When he landed the role, Keith was just a name given to a person in the accounts department.
One thing in the script said someone leaves a message on his answer phone, and it was Ewan.
Hello, you're through to Keith.
And he was just cracking us up.
I will be at training all day today.
We just started writing more and more scenes for him. He just very quickly became one of our sort of beloved characters, and also in the audience's eyes as well.
Big practice with your life.
Ewan McIntosh, a performer who could bring uncontrollable laughter with just a perfectly timed Scotch egg.
That was so good. That was so good.
Ewan McIntosh, who has died at the age of 50. Time now for a look at the weather. Staff Danaos is here. Hello.
Hi, Sophie. Thank you very much. Good evening to you. Temperatures are expected to drop at the end of tomorrow and through Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It will be much cooler than what we've been used to. A few showers around, which could be wintry as well over northern and western hills. So that's certainly what will be noticeable of the weather for the end of the week. But before we reach that point, we have a lot more wet weather to move in. Already as we head through the night, that wet weather will be pushing into Wales, southwest England, into the Midlands, and maybe rumbles of thunder with it. But it's colder across Scotland and Northern Ireland tonight. A few showers here which will be wintry over the hills, but still fairly mild across the southeast. Now this is the parent low sitting near Iceland. We'll have a little low pressure spin up across the south of Britain as we head through the morning into the afternoon. You can see it there, squeezing the isobars, indicating a spell of gales, but you'll notice the blue colours taking over at the end of Thursday. We're all into that cold air then. But there could be some localised flooding issues with this band of heavy squally rain spreading across the Midlands, southern and eastern England through tomorrow morning. It'll take a while to clear. We could see further pulses of heavy rain moving into this east and southeast throughout the day. Gales there across the south coast into the southeast. Elsewhere, it's a bright day, sunshine and showers. These will be wintry on the hills in the north. A blushy day to come for all, but certainly windy across southern Britain, particularly the southeast, where gusts could be in excess of around 50, 60 miles an hour for a time. And temperatures much lower than what we've been used to, 4 to 8 degrees. As we head through Thursday night, the rain eventually clears from the southeast. It's clear spells and showers. And again, there will be some winteriness over the higher ground, northern and western hills. And even be a touch of frost in one or two sheltered locations, perhaps even a risk of ice. So it stays chilly for Friday into the weekend. A lot of sunshine around, a few showers, which will be wintry, certainly over the high ground. There's a chance with light winds. We could see some mist and fog as well in places. That's it from me, Sophie.
Staff, thank you. And that's it from the BBC News at 10. It's time now for the news where you are. Good night.